Hello there, I'm Willy Wormhead, and today I am going to talk to you about a technique that we use with short row colourwork and how you can place your motifs within a part of your fabric or add a border around it. This is a question that comes up a few times, so I thought today I would talk you through how to do it and give you a demo with one of my swatches. Now, if you're wondering what short row colourwork is, then this is a best-selling book that I wrote that was published in May 2024. I'll drop the link into the description. It is a technique I developed. It's a fully fledged technique that has its own rules and guidelines and charting system and all sorts. And there is a lot of information packed into this book. It's a new technique, which meant that we had a lot to cover. And that meant that because paper's expensive and we have to keep page count to a limit, otherwise the price of the book just goes sky high, it meant as an editing team, we had to get clever with how we shared some of this information. There wasn't space to kind of break everything out and put it into a small segment or a chapter by itself for every single little thing that I wanted to teach through the book. It meant that we were teaching some other concepts through various chapters and reiterating them in other chapters. So the idea of adding a border is no different to the concept of balancing our fabric. Now, to reiterate, balancing our fabric, all shaping aside, is about every stitch, having the same number of rows worked across it. Now, this is important because it means that we don't add in any unintentional shaping. And I wanted this to be a key principle because I wanted the short row colourwork to maintain the same properties of garter stitch, i.e. to be same stretch, same gauge, same everything, so that it could be used within garter stitch. And it meant that designing with short row colourwork would be easier because you don't have to worry about the gauge of one stitch pattern versus another one and so on. So balancing the fabric is a particularly important element. It's one of the key elements to this technique. And if you've taken I teach a lot of short row colourwork classes online and sometimes in person. If you're interested in hearing about those, then sign up to my newsletter. Um, if you've taken a class with me, you'll know that I talk about balancing the fabric a lot because it's important. And adding a border or placing a motif in your fabric and thinking about how you're going to work the rest of the fabric around it, which is basically like a large border. The principle is exactly the same. You've got to balance the fabric. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the overhead. I have a swatch prepared that I use in one of my workshops, and I'm going to show you how we work a border in short row colourwork using a motif in a plain piece of garter stitch fabric. Okay, so here is my swatch. This has a small border on it. It's only 6 stitches either side. And as I said before, your border can be any size that you want it to be. All right, it doesn't need to be this small. It can be narrow. You can place your motif in one corner and have a wide bit of fabric over here, however you want to do it. The principles are the same. Now, we know with short row colourwork that when you are working any right side border or at the beginning of the row, you can work the beginning of the row or start the row in your background color or yarn A and then change to yarn B to work your motif. The issue occurs when we get to yarn B over this side. We have to do a short row, come back, and then the stitches outside of the motif, whether it's a border or a larger piece of knit fabric, aren't worked. So that's the issue that we're going to be resolving today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get this going. I'm going to work the next row of this pattern in yarn B. Okay. So this is the border on the right hand side that I'm working in the background color. Then I change to yarn B after my marker. Now markers are really handy for helping mark where your motif starts and finishes. Now I'm going to change to yarn B over on the back here, swap the yarns over, and then knit across. Now, unlike other colourwork unlike other colourwork methods, we do not float the yarn or carry across the row, which means that yarn A stays firmly parked there. That's why people say to me, okay, well, when I've worked this particular part of the motif in yarn B, how do I balance the stitches outside of the motif or in the border when they get to this side. Now, we've worked this row across here, this part of the stripe. We have to borrow a stitch from the other side of the marker. If you've read the book, this touches on borrowed stitches, and I want to explain this more in another video. But basically, we need to work a stitch outside of the motif to be able to do a short row and return back. So we do a German short row there. And remember that short rowed stitches technically have no height, so we're not knitting this stitch at all. This still becomes part of the area, or still remains part of the area that needs further balancing. So we're going to work back. Finish this part of the stripe, and then we'll have a look at what's happening on that left hand side when we view it from the right side of the work. Now we'll change yarn at this point. Always swap your yarns on the wrong side of the work. And then we go back to the right hand selvage. I'm going to slip stitch selvage on here because that's what I do for my swatches. Okay, so we worked this stripe across here. We put a short row here. We borrowed a stitch from this side outside of the motif to be able to do our short row. So we return with B. However, these 6 stitches are now 2 rows or 1 ridge less than all of this section over here. Now, because we didn't float yarn A across the back in the row, it wasn't there for us to kind of like change over and work these edge stitches. We don't want to float this all the way across because that's what we do in stranded. We're not doing that in short row colourwork. This is a different technique. And it would cause long floats and you'd have to catch them and it would be a waste of yarn, really. I don't want that to be part of the technique. I don't want anybody working 2 different colours in one row. You only work in one row, one colour at a time. Okay, so when you need to balance outside of the motif on your border or what other part of the fabric that you're working on, you do it ideally on the next time that the yarn A or the background colour reaches the left hand selvage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way across over here in the background colour. Now, you look at this pattern, there is actually 2 rows of the plain background colour in between each motif stripe. So this is the first row of the background stripe. We go all the way across to the left-hand selvage. Try and knit as fast as I can so you don't have to sit here and watch me knitting all day. Okay, so we get here, we slip the marker, we work across that short row that we created earlier so that B could return. And then we get to the edge. Now, before we work the return row in yarn A, what we're going to do is we're going to put a short row here to balance this row here. So in exactly the same way that this motif has got short rows in yarn B and then short rows in yarn A to balance it out, to make them equal and opposite and balanced, we do exactly the same with these border stitches or stitches outside of the motif. Do exactly the same. So we are going to knit a short row here, put a short row on this stitch, go back and do all that before we do our final return row on yarn A. So we turn. Ooh. We borrow a stitch from the other side of the marker so that we can work a short row. That way then the short rows are fully balanced out. They butt up against each other. And then we come back to this left-hand selvage, work it. And now you see there, we did a short row in B up to this point, and we've now just done a short row there to that point, and they balance each other out. That's it, really. That's that simple. And now we close off this part of the motif by now fully working all the way across. So I always recommend, and it isn't always possible to do this, but I recommend working any balancing short rows at the next available opportunity, i.e. when the background color gets to the left-hand selvage, so that you can work any short rows along that side there. Doesn't always work out that way, but you want to do them as soon as possible. A, so that you don't forget about them, and B, so that they are close to where they need to be balancing. Because if they are in a different place, they can change the pattern. Because how short row colour work is developed is actually the placement of short rows, where you put them and how they distort the fabric. So if you don't want to distort the fabric, or don't want to distort the pattern, then you can't place them in different places. But that's kind of like a lesson for another time. That's going into designing your own short row colour work. So I'm going to go off on a tangent. And so let's stop there. So we now have our balanced border. All of these stitches, let's pull that through and lay that flat. We can have a look at it. There's no distortion going on there within the fabric. They've all of the stitches have got the same number of rows worked. The balancing has occurred on this side here, and that is all nice and even. So that's how you do it. Just treat it exactly the same as you would when you work along one of these short rows here in the adjustables. I hope that's helped give you a little bit of insight into balancing the short rows, making sure the fabric's balanced, and what you would do to kind of make sure that your motif is nicely placed within your fabric, however you're using it, and that the rest of the fabric around it kind of all plays nicely with it and balances out. I keep saying that word balance, but it's a key thing. It's not difficult. I think practicing with the adjustables in the book, which is what I always say to people anyway, but a lot of people, dive in and try something different. But practicing with the adjustables, trying them out, swatching with them, and trying some of the projects that use the adjustable motifs really helps give you an understanding of how the short rows play with each other. They do need to have something to be opposite them. It's kind of like a scale, right? They need to balance. They need to be the same. They can't have one set of stitches with more rows than the other, because then they start to get distorted. So that's what the balancing is. Every stitch has the same number of rows worked. And so when you think about it like that, you think, well, actually, okay, the stitches outside of my motif, however you've placed your motif in your design, also need to have the same number of rows worked. So that will mean, oh, another short row needs to be worked on that section. And that's the best way, I think, thinking about it. If you've got any questions, do pop them in the comments, because I'm working on more videos about short row colour work and some of the key principles of it. Some of the rules, things like the borrowed stitches and things like that, that I want to kind of explain in more detail visually, to help you kind of understand some of the techniques involved in this colour work method, because it's fun and I really, really want to see more people try it. So if you've got any questions, pop them down below. And otherwise, I'll catch you next time. See ya.